and welcome to another week and another huddle breakdown with me, Laura. I'm joined by James and Alan. James, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm trying to get back into my routine of doing a workout around lunchtime, which is usually when we record these things. And so my pinkish hue, that's because I've gotten back in. It's not because it's nice weather here or anything. It's because I almost passed out about 5 minutes ago. So I'm recovering is how I'm doing.
When he says workout, all he actually means is he's walked into every room in his house and back out. That's a workout.
It is a long walk.
It's probably about 2.5 miles behind, isn't it?
Yeah.
Hey, I have 2 flights of stairs to go up and down, Alan. I'll have you know. That's a lot of work.
Showing off, Alan, 2 flights of stairs in his house?
You want to see our house, our stairs in Sheffield. They're like that.
Fancy. I wonder if, are you like Kevin McAllister in Home Alone? Do you have like a scary old fireplace in the basement that you don't like going down to?
You know what? I wish. We don't have a fireplace in the basement, but I wish we did. The furnace is down there.
That's a furnace. The furnace.
What goes in there shall remain uncommented on.
It's large enough to heat a small industrial unit.
Fair enough. Well, the reason for my pinkish hue, James, is because I am still recovering from having watched the Celtic v Dortmund match. And I did it in particularly special circumstances because, as I am wont to do, I decided to host family on that particular evening with my nice big projector screen that I bought during COVID at some point when I had far too much time on my hands. So I watched us ship 7 goals in like 84 inches, about 6 feet from my face. And I have to say it was no better for it, I have to say.
Hosting all these people, the last thing you want to do is actually speak to anybody. Excellent.
No, I've learned my lesson. I'll be locking myself in a dark room by myself.
Yeah.
In the future.
Yeah, watch on your phone.
But we'll get on to happier times, and that is the win over Ross County. James, I'll come to you first. I'll be completely honest, I did not see the first half of this game. So I was out in the car doing that sort of thing of like my phone was buzzing and I could see this penalty to Ross County, 1-0 to Ross County. Did my scroll of Twitter. You can imagine what was coming through. So the first half was
measured and reasonable. I'm going for.
Yeah,
is that, am I there? Are you there? Yeah.
Obviously, it's Twitter we're talking about, or X, formerly known as Twitter. How poor was that first half? Was it as bad as the narrative suggested?
Yeah, it wasn't great. But as we always like to talk about, the context, the travel and, coming off a European game that was a debacle. So going up to Dingwall, not the greatest segue. The other issue, I think, and Alan pointed this out smartly on Thursday, stereotypically, Alan, you're pointing something out smartly on a Thursday, is the pitch dimensions. I think that also, that contributes to when a team sets up the way they set up to have less space to cover with their shorter pitch. I think also kind of fed into this, and it's not, I think, unusual that we go up there and have a little bit of issue on a relative basis if they set up the way that they did. And we weren't great. It was some of the passing was off again, and so yeah, it just wasn't a great half. The penalties, the variance monster we talk about, and the XG for the game was within our dreaded 1 net differential in XG, which is where we always talk about. That's where points are apt to get dropped at a higher probability, and that certainly couldn't have happened on Sunday. So yeah, it wasn't great. I'd say overall the game wasn't that great. Second half got a little bit better. I'm not sure what the heck Ross County was doing with their substitutions and some of their switches. That seemed to be interesting, but yeah, it's just in the grand scheme of things, it's not anything. It's one of these things where you say is a one-off. Like you have games like this every season, even when peak Ange ball or the invincible season, like going to Dingwall on a Sunday after, or a Saturday or Sunday after a European game and grinding out a result, not that big of a deal. The question is whether or not it becomes more of a pattern, meaning that are there structural issues that we have that domestic opposition are going to be able to capitalize on to create more of these than we otherwise would have. That would be my concern potentially. But, as a one-off, I don't think it was that big of a deal. But certainly not the most barn burner of an exciting, wonderful entertainment product.
No, not like Angie's game, the man you just mentioned the other night. But that's not any better for your health either, I don't think.
Not if you're a Spurs supporter. No, I would think not.
Alan, we will come to you in a second, because I know that you want to talk a little bit about some of the commentary coming out from the game that maybe wasn't as accurate as it maybe appeared. But James, just to close out on your thoughts on the match, how much of the struggle that we did have before it got into the better parts, obviously, do you think was down to Ross County managing the situation, and how much of it was down to our own sort of, tiredness or just lack of preparedness for that journey and for that match?
Yeah, so I think they were set up relatively smartly, meaning that they were, as I call, kind of controlled energy. So they weren't running around like lunatics in defending their final third, kind of our attacking third, their defensive third. They were in kind of a 3-4-2-1, 5-4-1 kind of defensive block. And again, with the space compressed because of the pitch dimensions, they defended well. Like, I thought they were pretty well organized. And, they were passing off runners pretty well. Could our relative lethargy, if there was some, contribute to that? Sure. My concern is, and I've been talking about this all season now, and we got a small sample of this against Falkirk, but this is more so a pure version of what I've been talking about, which is, when are we going to face a team that's reasonably well organized, deploys a defensive block in a competent way, and isn't all that interested in scoring, and to pick up a penalty or a set piece, basically playing for a 0-0. How effective are we going to be in breaking down the block from open play? And I don't think we had a lot of good answers for it from this past weekend. Now, again, there's all these mitigating circumstances that I'm talking about, but it is a data point that I've been concerned about, of the relative mix of our players now, the squad composition with O'Reilly gone and kind of who we swapped in for him, and some of the temperamental issues that we get out of Hatate at times. Some games he can be unstoppable, other games not so much. So I think we saw a potential risk of that manifesting. But I need to see more evidence of that, this because of these mitigating circumstances. So if I was paranoid, which I always am, that would be what I would be potentially worried about, is that other teams look at Falkirk and say, let's just be relatively compact, smart defensive block, and these guys aren't going to be able to create an open play against us. And even the winning goal, we kind of caught them in transition, which again, that's to our credit, and obviously it was a great finish, and that's what Kuhn's very good at. But that's not us breaking them down when they're organized. That specifically is what I'm kind of concerned about from a squad composition perspective. So we need more evidence. We need to see it more. I suspect we'll see it more. I suspect we might see it more in the next game, because Aberdeen's pretty well organized defensive team. So that'll be an interesting game to preview when we get to it. But so yeah, that's kind of what I'm waiting to see more evidence for as we come out of this game.
Alan, James touched on it there. We did eventually get the turnaround in the match. We persisted, you might have called it, during Ange Ball. We never stopped until we got the victory. Some people were suggesting that a big reason for that was the number of substitutes that we made in the game. On the hour mark, Paulo Bernardo, Luke McCowan and Kyogo replaced Arne Engels, Rio Hatate and Adam Ida, respectively. And then a couple of minutes later, James Forrest replaced Dyson Maeda. in your mind, is it as simple as Rodgers saw that we were struggling, made those changes, and those were the turnkey moments that made the match what it was? Or is it not quite as simple as that for you?
Yeah, well, no, is the short answer to that. It isn't that, I don't think. I mean, I think there's two things. So going back to the first half then, and the sort of consensus, the commentary around was, and this is, you hear this almost every week if Celtic don't score, is they just need to move the ball quicker. And in fact, actually, it's not just Celtic games. You see that analysis. You see that in any team that's possession-based, and it's 0-0 at half-time or they're 1-0 down, they just need to move the ball quicker, right? Now, unfortunately, we don't have metrics for that, really. But for me, that it just smacks, intuitively, that just smacks of kind of lazy thinking, lazy analysis, and also kind of grinds a little bit, with my sort of overall philosophy on life which is if things aren't going well, work smarter, not harder, right? And so, the answer isn't just to do everything that you were doing faster, right? More chaotically, with less care and with more risk. That doesn't sound intuitively to me like the best way to approach a problem that Celtic were facing at half-time. And when I reflect on the game, the way I would support that really was to say, this wasn't a quality issue of just simply everybody moving faster, moving the ball faster. It's a qualitative issue. It's what you do and doing the things well that you need to do. So, as James said, the way that County were set up in a 5-4-1 with a nice box or diamond in the middle of the field was a really, really nice defensive system. They didn't drop too deep. Usually no further than the edge of their own box, and it was a pretty effective. And they all committed to it, and they all did pretty well at it. And that in itself, and again, listen, one of the threads of this show is, there are two teams on the pitch. Yes, we're here to talk about Celtic, but Celtic don't operate in glorious isolation, right? What the opponent does has an effect, even if it's a club, with the budget, Ewan Murray of Ross County. Because at the end of the day, the good news is, and this is good news for Celtic, the great news for Celtic in the Champions League, and I keep coming back to this point, if you set up 11 athletes on the pitch to be difficult to break down, you will cause that, whoever you're playing, problems, whether they've got a 50 million budget more than you or a 5 pence more budget than you. So, fair play to Ross County for doing that. But back to Celtic then. Firstly, let's look at the forwards, in terms of, how did they help to affect the game in the final third? Now, Ross County played pretty narrow. They had two fullbacks basically pushed right back, and they had 4 in midfield that were basically congesting that area. So there was actually, as James says, Ross County's pitch is short, but it's the same. In fact, it's a yard wider than Celtic Park, which I know people may find difficult to believe because of that stupid, such a shallow camera angle that you see on the television. But it is actually at least as wide as Celtic Park. So there was plenty of room out wide. It's long story short to get the ball. The problem and Maeda actually got quite a lot of the ball. But, what did he do? He either did what he normally does, which is stop, turn, pass the ball back, or when he did go past his fullback, he usually beat him for space. And then we got the usual kind of Maeda, it either goes into the stands or over the bar or what have you. And then on the other side, we had Kuhn, who again, on one occasion, skipped past his fullback very easily, showing that, he had the beating of him on a one-on-one, and we never saw that again. Every time you'd cut inside into traffic where they had 4 midfielders waiting for that trap, plus the 3 sat on the edge of the box. And even Ida actually got about 7 times more of the ball than Kyogo would get in 90 minutes in that first half. But what did he do when he got the ball? He get the ball, they managed to get it into his feet in promising areas, and what did he do? He sent it straight back from where it came from, often passing 20 yards backwards, 10, 20. He did that numerous times. So the front 3 really didn't have the quality on the ball to make most of the openings that actually were there. So to me, that's a quality issue. That's not a do it faster issue. And then if we go back to the midfield, between the 3 midfielders, they had attempted 5 through balls, none of which were successful. 3 of them by McGregor, 1 each by Hatate and Engels. That's not enough. So that is a case of are you being creative enough in your passing? Engels actually had 0 pack passes, not a single pack pass to a forward player. Hatate had 2 and McGregor had 3. That's 5 pack passes. A pass from midfield that actually breaks lines, takes people out of the game to one of the forward players. Every single one was to Maeda. They never found Ida because, again, from a pack passing perspective, McGregor often hit Ida centrally, breaking the line, but I don't count it as a pack pass if the ball comes flying straight back again. You've not done anything with it. You've not broken any lines there, because a pack pass has to have a giver and a receiver, and both have to be successful for that to count as, if you like, as taking players out of the game. If you simply pass the ball backwards again, that's not a pack pass. It might be a pack pass, but it's not a pack receipt. Therefore, the transaction's broken, and we start again, right? So I think those were the systemic issues. It was a quality issue, not a just do it faster issue. And then in the second half, if you look at it was the subs what won it. Well, really? I mean, James Forrest had 4 really bad shots. Well, one was okay. It kind of got blocked, but it still got blocked. I mean, I don't really like shots that are blocked in general. It was at least inside the box, the only one that he had inside the box. 4 really bad shots. When I say bad shots, I mean from bad areas, never going to trouble the goalkeeper, and didn't. The four substitutes, right? The 4 substitutes, they were all attacking substitutes, contributed 0.62 expected scoring contribution in the time they were on the pitch, right? So that's expected goals plus expected assists. That's not particularly high for the last third of a game. Yeah. Between them, they completed 6 pack passes and they had 7 possessions in the opposition box. So none of them really, affected the game in any meaningful way. And yet, 2/3 of Celtic's XG was generated after the 50th minute. Ross County had no shots at all after the 51st minute. But you got to think, Ross County executed 185 pressures. Celtic had 68. Ross County almost had as many pressures as the attempted passes. So that's a lot of running. It's a lot of running without the ball. They had 18% possession of the ball, according to StatsBomb. So what happened? Essentially, they just ran out of energy. And really, then in that second half, it wasn't any masterstroke or brilliance from the substitutes. As I say, quite the opposite, actually. They didn't contribute a huge amount other than fresh energy, fresh minds, fresh legs, which absolutely has utility. It's just simply the case that Ross County could not keep up with 18% possession, couldn't keep up that style of play for 90 minutes. Most teams can't. They're going to basically die, but usually around the 55-minute mark is my estimate. It varies. And I think for them, it was around about the 50-minute mark. They pretty much blew up.
They should do what we do and just blow up in the first half against stronger opposition, get it over with. Sorry, continue. So two myths. Just do it faster. No, be smarter, please. And, it were the subs what won it. Well, not really. They just got really, really tired. And eventually we did kind of grind them down. But listen, as James rightly said, okay, these kind of games are not uncommon, okay? I look back at, I started collecting detailed match data, the 14, 15 seasons, so nearly 10 seasons. So in the 9 seasons that Celtic won the league, we've actually, what is interesting is that 23% of Celtic's wins are by 1 goal. Okay? So that's a reasonable chunk, but actually 31% are by, and this is where James talks about that Celtic don't blow teams away enough relative to the clubs like Ajax or Porto in those leagues where there is a similar disparity between the top and the bottom. But we actually win 31% of our games by three goals or more, which is easily the highest difference, if you like, of any result. If you add in the number of wins by 2 goals, which let's classify a 2-goal win as a comfortable win and a 3-goal plus win as a blowout, that's 54% of Celtic games are essentially comfortable wins by 2 plus goals. The other 47 are made up of 23% by 1 goal, 15% are draws, and 8% are losses. But the unique thing, or not the unique thing, but the more interesting thing about Sunday's game, of course, was that it was a come from behind win. So come from behind are actually relatively rare. Football being a low scoring sport, and you'll often see
it's a favourite of Sky and other TV companies that they'll always tell you that, oh, Liverpool haven't lost for 89 games when they score first. And, isn't this amazing? It's not actually amazing, because most teams generally don't lose the game if they score first at this level of football. And actually Celtic have had in 9 seasons, well, there you go, little quiz. So how many league games, this is league games only, how many league games have Celtic won from behind in 9 seasons? So I'll let James go first, and Laura, you get a bit more thinking time, because James has probably got a bit of historical knowledge from data.
No, I absolutely don't on that aspect. I'm gonna say probably 15.
Okay.
15 over the 9 seasons. I'm trying to think how many times I've used the phrase, come on Celtic, get the finger out, which would probably be about, I'm going to say maybe about, I'm going to go about a bit higher than you. I'm going to say
not Price is Right me. I'm going to be pissed.
Yeah, I'm going to say it's about 30, something like that.
Good.
You are absolutely bang on. Awesome. Not only were you right, it was the right answer 100%, 30 times. Now, it was a bit of a tricky question, because included in that are games where perhaps the other team score first and then Celtic score 5. Right?
Right.
Okay,
Okay. So if we narrow it down to Celtic go behind and they win the game by 1 goal. So these are the real sort of squeaky bum wins. It's actually, James, it's actually what you said. It's only 15. So over 9 seasons, there's 15 times that Celtic have come from behind to win by 1 goal. That's 4% of all matches, which means that Celtic are twice as likely to lose the game as they are to come from behind and win by 1 goal. So in that respect, I was actually quite happy on Sunday with the outcome. I was kind of outcome driven, thinking, given all the context, given the tiredness, the dent in confidence, the really smart way that I thought Ross County set up. I mean, clearly some players were struggling. I mean, Maeda attempted 4 pressures over the game. I mean, that's just a ludicrously low number. And he ended up getting subbed. I mean, when's the last time he got taken off? Engels had a -12 packing score. So there were some really, really not good performances by key players. And again, you can give some context around that. So I think all in all, that was a relatively rare come from behind, win by 1 goal. And do you know what? You need a few of them, a couple of them during the season, especially when you're protecting 100% record. So after all I've said, I'll take it. I'll take it.
James, it kind of puts me in mind of, as you do after the week that we've had and the defeat to Dortmund, I certainly take in all the content I can, listen to all the podcasts that I can to try and establish what other people are thinking, sort out my own thoughts. And one conversational point that is coming up an awful lot is the difference in level between the Champions League and the domestic league. Now, Alan touched on it there, that our opposition just tired out at the 60th minute or thereabouts. We talked about how we did that to Falkirk in the League Cup. I guess what I'm trying to get to is, and what I should clarify as well is, some of the things that you guys highlight in this podcast as Celtic players maybe not doing this right, not doing that right, slacking on this and that, those things are okay at the domestic level when we can get away with it. But I have to say, I'm becoming much more aware, talking to you guys and paying closer attention to these things, that we should be trying to eliminate that from the domestic game. Otherwise, it's going to become a habit that we can't break against these better teams. Is that a harsh assessment, do you think? Or do you think we should be trying to, operate in a more professional way domestically, if that's a fair way to put it?
I think it's just very difficult because, you can't replicate the speed and the required speed of thought in order to compete against athletes like we faced in Dortmund. I mean, it's just, the probably the best competition that the players face is in training on a day-to-day basis. And even there, you're talking about, significant degrees down in size, speed, technical level, like the intersection of those things. So, I think the issue is we always talk about scaling and how do things scale, and how you have somebody like Alistair Johnston who, I think he's done a tremendous job of growing into the role that's required of him, playing as what's effectively an attacking fullback at Celtic, when I don't think that's his natural ability. Like, I don't think that's what he was born to play. I think that he, like a Greg Taylor, these guys have done yeoman's work to shape themselves into a role and to do it at a very good level domestically. But if it's not your core competency, like if it's not where your talents reside necessarily, and you've kind of grown into making yourself proficient, those things tend to crumble at a higher rate when they're stress test against higher level competition. And so with a lot of these things that we kind of get away with, so, there's understandable talks about the obvious ones, which are the mistakes, and that when when Maeda has one of his brain farts or, horrible touches or whatever, domestically, we don't get countered to the degree that we're going to face against a Dortmund, obviously. And we see that over and over again, where we screw up and build up, and, the opposition just, craps out and doesn't actually put together 3 passes and make us, pay for it. But I think it's even more so on the margins, like things that look like they're coming off well, but against better opposition wouldn't. There's these sliding doors aspect of all of this. And this is the innate problem. And this is what we've talked about in the past, which is if you want to play the way that our manager sounds like, I think we'll talk about this a lot more in depth on Thursday. If he actually is going to live up to being more like Ange and a footballing ideologue, and not being willing to kind of walk that back a little bit, it's impossible to prepare at that level to play that way. It's just, you can't. It's not possible because you're not facing those people. So, how do you practice something? How do you get better at something if you're not practicing it? It's impossible. And they can't replicate it. It's just not doable. So, I have a lot of sympathy for the players in that regard, because, to walk into these hornets' nests and to just think you're going to all of a sudden scale up in your skill level when you don't see that hardly at all. That's asking a lot of people.
Alan, do you think the Celtic coaching staff and players and things like that took a little bit too much positivity out of our recent runs going into that match, thinking we were closer to that level? Or
I think there's a lot of store put on the performances in the States prior to in the pre-season. I think that especially the victories over Manchester City and Chelsea, which were strong teams. I mean, they're probably not the 11 that played last Saturday for those two clubs by any means. But they were all very good players, and they're in environments where they're expected to win, and certainly wouldn't want to get embarrassed by a Scottish team. So I think there's a lot of store put on then, and what you saw in those games was a way of playing, especially building out from the back, where we'd hit the number 8s early with an inside pass, and you'd basically go to in, and then you go to out to the wingers and hit teams on the break. And I think that I'm oversimplifying, and I'm just giving one example, but. And the other aspect of it was they were asked to defend, and actually, if you remember those games, yes, 4-1, 4-3, but came under a tremendous amount of pressure in both games, as you can imagine. And Celtic actually defended pretty well, and people had to do their jobs, which is what I spoke about last week. Sometimes you just got to accept that, unlike against Ross County, you're going to be under pressure for chunks of the game, and you just simply have to defend and just accept that is the case. So I think the template was there. I think that I do feel when Brendan rejoined and we had Dominic Wells on the show from Leicester City, a Leicester City fan who excellent analyst, young analyst, and he was telling us about how Rodgers would set up in different ways depending on the opposition to help Leicester compete with teams at the top of the English Premier League, get through European rounds, got to a semi-final, etc. And I was really encouraged by that, and I think we saw glimpses of it last season, where it was kind of a classic Celtic in Europe. I thought we set up well. I thought we defended well. We thought we had good shape. We had moments of horrible goalkeeping and horrible luck and bad decision making, and it all fell apart in some games. And we didn't probably get what we deserved out of other games, especially home to Lazio. It was just a sort of usual bad luck story, but intrinsically, there was signs there that Rodgers was being smart in how he was setting the team up, and kind of that good faith built up by those very small wins from last season's Champions League, very small wins, kind of got thrown out the window in Dortmund, where I just feel, again, let's not overcomplicate it. I watched the Bochum game. I didn't see the Stuttgart game. Many people did. If you'd watched those games, and indeed, if you'd looked at Dortmund over the season, massively overperforming on their XG, conceding plenty of goals, conceding lots of chances, really trying to find their identity under a new coach who was moving the team from a counter-attacking style to a possession-based high-pressing style, lots of growing pains. If you'd watched especially those Stuttgart and then the first 30 minutes against Bochum, and you were of Rodgers' mindset of being an optimist, you might have thought you had a chance if you simply just played your normal game. And I think I do believe that's pretty much what happened. I think, again, we failed to live to the maxim, the Ange maxim of always assume your opponent will be at their best. And if we'd assumed that Dortmund would be at their best, there's no way in the world we would have played like that. So we made a very naive assumption that they were going to continue to be incoherent and play as they had done in patches in many of their previous games. And in some cases they did, because their final third interplay was actually really bad at times, as we talked about at length on Thursday. But defensively they were solid, and you simply cannot give players of that caliber the time and space to pick passes. You can't leave Julian Brandt with four colleagues against 3 or 4 Celtic defenders being able to pick runners running through at goal at pace. You can't do it. It's unprofessional. Actually, it was embarrassing, frankly.
Well, Alan, you were going through that. It struck me because I remember the games in the U.S. vividly, because fortunately I was able to attend 2 of them and watch the third on TV. And the fulcrum of our ability to punish Chelsea and Man City in particular was Matt O'Reilly. Right? I mean, he was the fulcrum, spraying those balls over the top to Kyogo and Kuhn in particular, but also Maeda to a lesser degree. And I mean, that's my kind of major concern, is that the composition of our midfield is just not anywhere near replicating what O'Reilly brought to the table from a ball progression perspective, from a creativity perspective. And, Hitate to a lesser degree was able to do that in those games. And I'm still confident that he can do that on, occasion. It's the consistency issue that we always talk about there. But to go in to Dortmund, all of the things that you're talking about, and I agree with your assessment. I think that's a reasonable assessment to make. But then to have those 2 midfielders trying to replicate what happened in the summer, to me, that's incoherent. Like, on no planet is Arne Engels and Paulo Bernardo, able at this point. We've seen no evidence of it. Let's put it that way. Like, maybe they're going to grow into it, but I have not seen much evidence at all. I haven't seen any evidence that either of them in their career to date are going to serve that role in quarterbacking, counterattacking football against teams like Dortmund, and like we saw Matt O'Reilly do against Chelsea and Man City. So It goes back. I'm not sure what the game plan was, because who was going to, like, I could see if it was one of those two with, Hatate, and say, okay, well, Hatate and McGregor, we're going to try to do that. All right. And, I'm not too confident in that setup, but at least I could see the logic. But with who he decided to select and play the way that he played, with the idea of our performance in the summer, I don't get it. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I don't know how we ended up there, but we still had a little bit of getting it out to do after that Dortmund game. But I do encourage anybody who hasn't listened to it to go back to listen to James, Alan and Martin on the Thursday show. Break it down. Alan also did a really great piece for the Celtic Way, which I know a lot of people got a lot out of. Trigger warning here, it does mention the name Adeyemi a fair few times, so if that's something that you don't feel like you can handle at this point, maybe leave it for a while. But just to end this segment on a positive note, James, I'll come to you. That result aside, had that gone slightly better, even if we had lost it by not an embarrassing amount, the spin out of it might have been a little bit more positive. But domestically anyway, we've had a run of 3 games where we've scored at least 5 goals. This is all since the last international break I'm talking about. We've beat Hearts 2-0. We've got that victory against Ross County. Going into this international break with Aberdeen up next, their closest rivals at this point. How do you think we're sitting in terms of going into a post-international break run of games that really is going to test our mettle?
Yeah, I think it. So what concerns me about last week is that we saw 2 iterations of the facets of play that I've been most concerned about, and that hadn't been stress tested other than Falkirk to a weird degree. And I mean that, in a flattering way to Falkirk. You wouldn't think going into the season that that's the team that would stress test us from a defensive perspective.
I don't know. I was pretty stressed on Tuesday as well, I'll tell you that.
Well, right. Well, Dortmund, you would.
By the way, I'll have to show you. They were playing a top-of-the-table clash against Ayr United at home on Saturday, right? Falkirk second, Ayr United, Scott Brown's team.
Ayr United, yeah.
They won 2-0, blew them off the park. The second goal is a classic back-to-front, starts with the goalkeeper all the way up the pitch goal. So I'd encourage you to watch it. You might be less stunned.
There you go with this Falkirk again, Alan. I tell you.
They're the most entertaining football team in Scotland outside of Celtic. That's why
you would say that, Alan. Sorry.
Tell me another. Tell me another.
I think that could be true. I don't think that's an unreasonable statement to make. But it's basically the high press. So a coherent, well-applied high press that we saw from Dortmund, I would argue, and our issues with build-up and ball progression. So that's been a lingering concern I have. And then how do we, from open play, break down an organized defensive block? And we hadn't seen either of those really, other than Falkirk, both in one game actually, the whole rest of the season to date, or at least that's been my assessment. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what other teams look at this past week against us. We talked about this in Ange's, I think it was his second season, I've said it over and over again, the St. Mirren model, where people were like, oh, finally they figured out a way to defend and not get completely destroyed against Ange ball. And you started to see more and more teams start to deploy that against us. And I wonder, if the penny drops a little bit with our opposition, whether we see more of that. So that's my lingering concern. It shouldn't be a huge problem because, again, we've got a generally a manager who's very competent and a good coach. I don't extrapolate a lot of what happened at Dortmund for the rest of the campaign, other than until the last game, meaning that we're not going to face the level of athletes and I'll call them studs, athletic studs that we did in Dortmund until we face Aston Villa. So even Atalanta, as good as they've been, they're, back to Alan's thing, they're a smarter, not harder type of team. they're such a challenge because they're so smart. It's not because they have just incredible raw athletes that they're throwing at you. So they present a different challenge. I'm not saying I'm optimistic. I haven't really looked at it or thought about it that much yet. But I think, them, Bruges, going to Zagreb, like young boys at home who just sacked their manager. I don't think a lot of the issues that we had against Dortmund are necessarily transferable to those games. So I'm actually reasonably optimistic. And the other part of this, we talked about a little bit last week. It'd be really, really incredible outlier for Aberdeen to keep up what they're doing. And because they're defying kind of their underlying metrics to such a degree. And, Rangers are still a bit of a basket case. So I think given what is going on with the competition, you still have to be very, very optimistic. But there are chinks in the armor that I'm worried about. And that could be fluid as we, get back to being a month, basically. And let's see how we do, at Kilmarnock and, some of the more traditional, I think that's within a month, maybe 6 weeks, more of the traditional difficult defensive block type of situations and how we handle those in open play.
We shall see. Listen, we've got a few weeks to ponder that Aberdeen game and how we will or won't approach it in an international break in between. During that time, Huddle Breakdown will continue to provide as much content as we can. Alan, what is happening on Thursday's show this week for anybody who wants to listen to that?
Yeah, as I teed up, we it's obviously international break. We've got no game particularly to preview, so we'll take a bit of a stock take on the season so far. We've got Quinny from Celtic here, and he has his own channel as well. He'll be coming on, really entertaining guy, very tactically aware as well. So we'll probably talk about deep dive into how Rodgers has set the team up so far this season. I'm sure we'll speculate a little bit about how the European games might go on that basis as well. So that's to look forward to on Thursday. And just a quick mention again that the Substack, or it's a website, is now up and running. So the Huddle Breakdown, if you Google Huddle Breakdown, put in the word Substack as well, you'll find essentially a lovely site with all of the content, written and audio, video, etc., from all of us, really on one nice shiny site that's now open for business. We're finalising the kind of subscription model, but again, a reminder that this Tuesday, well, we're recording on a Tuesday, you probably come out on a Wednesday. This show will be free to air if you so choose, as will the kind of key Yorkshire Whistler analysis pieces as well. So, but otherwise, if you really, that's not enough for you and you want more nerdy content, then there will be an opportunity for you to consume a vast array of exciting new stuff.
Speaking of nerdy content, Alan, the last section we want to talk about before we wrap things up for this week is something not directly related to Celtic, but if you believe the papers and everything that you read in it, it might become related to Celtic and everybody in football. Everybody knows about the Bosman ruling in the 90s and how that affected players' rights around contracts. There is another case that the verdict was heard on Friday that some outlets are trying to equate the outcome of that to the Bosman ruling, and it concerns former Chelsea, Real Madrid player Lassana Diarra and a dispute he had with his then club Lokomotiv Moscow, who he was with from 2014 to 16, and his subsequent club Charleroi, and a dispute he had around getting out of one contract and into another. Alan, you've been following this story and had some thoughts on it. So just for anybody that I've maybe not explained that as clearly to, what's your understanding of the case and how it's being covered so far?
Yeah, so listen, I mean, this touches on a couple of things which hopefully, we cover. We mean, they want to talk about Celtic, talk about performance, about tactics, about underlying metrics and all that good stuff. But I think, the business of football is something which interests us. And also, I have a personal interest in especially football media and how things are presented. And this has kind of been presented in a way with a lot of light and very little heat in terms of, the end of transfers and the death of transfers in football, and people speculating, but Celtic are a transfer model club, and how are they going to ever compete with teams in Europe, and how are teams ever going to get near Celtic if they can't sell players and bridge that gap and all that sort of thing. So just wanted to spend 5 minutes really on where we are with that. So as always with these kind of legal disputes, it's a long drawn out process, and it hasn't finished, right? So there's a final decision to be made at a Belgian appeal court, so the whole thing hasn't even been fully bound up yet in terms of what the legal implications are. But certainly some aspects of FIFA regulations around transfers have been deemed unlawful. But again, you gave a bit of background to Lassana Diarra. His case was highly specific. He was in a situation where he claimed he hadn't been paid by his club, Lokomotiv Moscow, and he terminated his contract. FIFA ordered him basically to pay Lokomotiv Moscow compensation for walking away from his contract. It's taken him 10 years to get to this stage in terms of the courts. And that's another reason why we need to be cautious about over speculating on the impacts of this. Footballers' careers are very short. And so forth, and nobody really wants to go through this again. So, highly specific case. But in general, the courts, and I'm talking about European courts, especially as I'm more knowledgeable of, have accepted that there is a need to offer protection and certainty in sporting institutions to help competition integrity and stability. I.e., if you didn't have some kind of transfer and registration window, you could have ridiculous situations like, a club in the English Premier League needs 3 points in the last game to avoid relegation. So we'll sign Lionel Messi for a game. We'll sign him for 2 weeks and he can play, and we'll sign Ibrahimovic and blah, 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 all that. You get, I'm exaggerating, but in all honesty, if you treat footballers like any other employee with, short notice periods and no restrictions on movement, then that's the sort of gaming that sports people will inevitably do, and it will just make a mockery of competitions. So there is a need to protect, and it's recognised in law. There's a need to protect competitions, and the likes of FIFA and UEFA have got obligations because of that to protect the competitions that they operate and run. You can't have a player playing for 5 different clubs in the same cup. That's that kind of thing, right? And remember, again, this is very important as well to remember the distinction between employment and registration. Okay? Employment is you have a contract with somebody and they pay you wages, you turn up to training and you train. Right? That's employment and you get paid for it. Right? Registration is being registered to play for that club in that competition. Right? So you could quite happily have somebody, this is where I think people shouldn't get too excited over this, because I think most of the issues here can be, in terms of risks to football, can be treated through registration rather than impinging on people's employment rights. In that, I could say to you, Laura, you go and sign wherever you want, and I will not stop them paying you. And if you want to walk away, you can walk away. However, I run the competitions, and they're my rules, and you can't play for 3 different clubs in that competition, right? And that's how you kind of get around a lot of these sort of issues. But of course, you've got different agencies here, different constituencies. So FIFPro, which is the professional footballers body, they want things to be taken further to allow players to be given greater freedom of movement, less tied down to contracts. But again, there is in law, there are sort of, common sense and other wider implications above and beyond those of just individuals. As I say, the need to protect competitions and the need to protect, especially in sport, etc. And so you're not going to get cases of saying, oh, I want to break my contract because you subbed me off in the last game and I'm a bit unhappy about it. It's like, the Lassana Diarra case was about not getting paid. I mean, that's a fundamental human right. You've turned up for work, you get paid. That's it, right? I mean, fine. I think we'd all agree with that. So, as I say, it's taken 10 years to get here for the Diarra case. It hasn't finished yet. I think that FIFA will need to perhaps amend a few regulations along the way, and probably to close some loopholes around specific cases like this. But I don't think it will. I don't think it will lead to widespread, ripping up and starting again of the transfer system. There's too many other wider competition and integrity issues, I think for that. So that's that one. The other one that caught my eye during the week was Manchester City's ongoing war with the English Premier League. So this isn't related to the 115 charges that they're on, some of which are very familiar if you've ever studied Scottish football. But anyway, let's not get into that. This is a completely separate issue around the granting of economic rights and fair value to things like sponsorship deals and so forth. But the aspect of it that caught my eye, and that may be germane in Scotland, was that one of the ways in which the English Premier Leagues own, because remember again, England are miles ahead of Scotland here. They've got their own layer of financial sustainability regulations, over and above those that UEFA impose at their level, because UEFA is only really concerned with clubs that are competing in European competition, whereas the English FA are concerned with clubs competing in all of their competitions in England, even the ones that don't play in Europe. So they've got their own version of FSR at league level. And one of the ways in which these regulations have been found to be quote unlawful is around how shareholder loans are treated in terms of this is where a shareholder at the club has maybe either gifted some money or given money to a club at very, very low interest. Now, some of these English clubs have got multi-million, hundreds of millions of shareholder loans on that basis, and the feeling is that it's a disadvantage to clubs who don't have that facility or don't use that facility, that these loans are not treated on a commercial basis in terms of interest, and are not therefore the costs to the business as offset by revenue, and therefore to drive the wage ratio are not accurately being reflected on the cost side of the balance sheet. And the reason that that's quite interesting is because we know in Scotland there's especially one club who have used shareholder loans as a means to remaining solvent to close what has been a 10 million black hole year on year. Now, under UEFA FSR, those shareholder loans are not considered revenue, but the interest on those loans, or lack of, are also not considered to be, part of the cost calculation if they are either sort of zero or not anywhere near commercial rates, which often they're not in this case. So, just another interesting one to keep an eye on. As I say, Scotland's got a long way to go. We don't have our own layer of FSR at league level that impacts all clubs. We only have FSR as it relates to those that participate in European competition. And the second thing is we don't have, and we're not in the process yet of having a football regulator, a governmental body to oversee, an independent regulator to oversee. And with what's going on in Inverness, it would seem to be a good idea. And with lots of clubs struggling financially, it would seem to be a good idea to protect supporters mainly from bad management by bad actors, etc., or incompetence. Anyway, so just another one on the financial front to keep an eye on.
Interesting one, James. Looking at the Lassana Diarra thing that Alan was touching on there, I think the important thing here is whether you know the intricacies of that particular case or not, there is a balance to be struck between ensuring fair competition for football clubs because of the amount of money that is at stake for them for competing in these competitions, but also maintaining that and remembering that you have human beings with employment rights and lives that they should be afforded the same freedoms that we all are in terms of the choices they're allowed to make about where they live, where they work, what they do, all that kind of thing. So I agree with Alan that on my brief reading of the case, it doesn't appear to have quite the impact that some outlets are currently trying to state that it does. But there's certainly considerations there to be had about how footballers are treated going forward.
Yeah, I've you wouldn't know it by looking at me and how youthful I look, but in my youthful age, my wife tells me I've become too cynical. And when I see all of these types of wranglings, I tend to see everything continue to float to the top. And somehow this is going to get worked out in a way that fits more with the Super League and the consolidation of resources and power sucking up. And so whatever so-called labor priorities that will be used to justify some changes, I don't know. Somehow I just suspect that it'll work out to, the Ronaldo's benefit. And, we see that in U.S. sports forever. The most famous being in the U.S. anyway, Major League Baseball's player union is infamous in how powerful it is. It is the most powerful, arguably outside of like federal government workers unions, or the main union for federal government employees, probably the most powerful union in the country, and or one of. And even if you look at how they negotiate their contracts, magically the last few have just floated higher. If you're Ohtani and you just signed for $700 million, you're real happy with the labor agreement. But if you're, the poor schlub riding a bus in the lower leagues equivalent in minor league baseball, where you're eating ramen noodles 7 nights a week because that's all you can afford, and you're living with 6 other people in a 2-bedroom apartment, which is the practical reality of how a lot of these people are leading their lives. So I suspect that's what we'll see is however it shakes out, it'll directionally continue to move the ball in the way that I suspect most people are not that happy with.
Yeah, well, I mean, perhaps we can take a life lesson from Tom Hanks in this situation and remember that there is no crying in baseball. So hopefully there's no crying in football either when it comes to contract disputes and all these things that are far too complicated and above my head. Alan, James, it's been a pleasure yet again this week. You guys will be back on Thursday. Don't worry, everybody. For anybody who is scared stiff of the boredom they're going to experience with international break time, we will do our best to provide you with content throughout that time to entertain you. Alan, James, thank you very much for joining me, and we'll see you again next week.